We'll dive into a little bit more on the trade deadline, the Phillies, and some Major League Baseball topics as we get ready, to get the calendar to August here, as Jerry Crasnick, ESPN senior baseball writer, joins me now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN with a look at the Phillies and the Major League Baseball deadline and other baseball topics that are getting us down to the stretch run. Jerry, how are you?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Always good, pal, and we know the Phillies the last couple of years. It was, they're going to move Hamels and Rollins and Utley. There was a lot of big names. They were able to really speed up their process here. Not so many big names this time, but what is the feeling on Jeremy Hellickson, as he seems to be the one guy whose name keeps coming up?
Well, as my ESPN colleague Jason Stark reported, I think they want a pretty good prospect for him, a top 4 or 5 prospects, and I'm not sure teams are willing to give that up for Jeremy Hellickson. So, but as we get closer to the deadline, teams tend to get a little bit more reasonable, and there's really not much reason for the Phillies to keep him. If you could get a guy who might fill a need for you in a year or two, you're not going to get an elite level prospect, but because there are so few pitchers out there, he does have some value. So, right now I think it's a waiting game, and teams are just waiting to see if the price will drop, and then they'll plunge. But right now, teams can ask as high as they want until Monday when the deadline comes. And it's not only the Phillies with Hellickson, it's the Padres with Andrew Cashner, and the A's with Rich Hill, and any kind of pitcher out there. Teams are going to be asking for a lot right now.
Yeah, Jerry, Hellickson's interesting because the Phillies don't have to trade him, right? I mean, they're not, pressured by the fact that he's going to be a free agent, because they can tender him in the offseason, and most likely, they're going to make teams think about signing him. So the Phillies are kind of in a position of power here, right?
Well, you have to give a guy a qualifying offer, I believe. And the qualifying offer is like $16 million for 1 year. So, I'm not sure they want him for that. Would they want to bring him back for that? That's to get a draft pick, if you do that. So you have to be prepared that he might accept that and come back next season on a 1-year deal for $16 million. And I don't know that Jeremy Hellickson's a guy that they feel that strongly about. That's a lot of money for him for a year. So I think they'd rather move him right now. He's just not like Aroldis Chapman, for instance. If the Yankees had kept him, they would have given him that qualifying offer, and he would have rejected it, and then they would have assured themselves of a draft pick. But with a guy like Hellickson, you don't really know. He might accept it, for that kind of money. So I think it's better if they move him. It just seems to make the most sense.
Yeah, and, there's a report by Jason Stark as well that basically said they're asking for one of your top 5 guys. If the Phillies were able to pull off a deal like that, would that be a pretty big move for Matt Klentak?
Yeah, that'd be a pretty good coup. I mean, some teams' top 5 guys are better than other teams' top 5 guys. I personally don't know that they're going to quite get that. I think it's posturing right now, and that's just sort of the way it works. I think teams right now say, hey, why not? There's very little other pitching out there. It's really a thin market. You're not going to be able to get Chris Sale, probably Chris Archer, or the Tampa guys. So, that leaves a pretty thin group. You might have Edinson Volquez. You might have Hector Santiago. None of these guys really are Cashner. They're not really viewed as 1 or 2 level guys. They're all sort of mid to bottom level guys, and they can help your team, but they're not going to carry your team to the playoffs. So, but that's the backdrop against which teams have to try to add pitching now, and that's why a lot of the teams that are searching for it are tending to get pretty impatient and frustrated right now.
Yeah, and of course, the Phillies are in a spot where they're not, making the playoffs. They know that. But, how much does the fact that they have a lot of pitching in their organization, a lot of young guys, you've already see Eflin, you already see Nola, you already see, Velasquez up here. You got Jake Thompson kind of knocking on the door. So do they want to try to clear a spot by moving Hellickson?
Yeah, I mean, I think they played the Hellickson thing right. This is the kind of guy you get. They also got Charlie Morton for this purpose, and it didn't quite work out. It might have just as easily been him. It was one of those guys you get for 1 year. He has a nice year. You kind of rebuild his value, and you flip him to a contender. So, I don't think they envisioned him being a guy that was going to be a long-term piece here, but kind of a mutually beneficial relationship. I mean, he got to rebuild his value, and the Phillies, they hope, will be able to trade him and get a half-decent prospect for him.
Would it surprise you, Jerry? There has been a little bit of rumblings about teams interested in Vincent Velasquez. Do you think the Phillies would think about that because of some of the arm issues, or would it be a shock if they moved him?
Yeah, you don't really see guys in that service time category get moved. I mean, these are the kind of pitchers that teams want, with 0, 1, 2 years of service that are under control for several years, and he certainly has a lot of upside, so I don't really see what the point would be. You just don't see those guys get traded, and he's a guy who could turn out to be really good. Maybe he's just a hard thrower who never quite gets it and doesn't become that top of the rotation guy. Maybe health becomes an issue, but, I just don't see him being a guy. You're going to have to get an awful lot, and I just don't see that kind of trade being particularly feasible for teams.
Talking with Jerry Crasnick, ESPN.com senior baseball writer here, as we're the Monday deadline. Normally it's the 31st. Because it fell on a Sunday, they bounced it to Monday here. The Phillies, really one name, but Genmar Gomez, he's been a name. Peter Borges, who just got put on the DL. Your prediction, a quiet deadline for Matt Klentak in year number one?
Yeah, I think probably quiet. I think they do move Hellickson. I think there's enough interest, whether it's Baltimore or Miami or, somebody I think is going to take the plunge on him and add him. But unfortunately, it's one of these deadlines where we're writing a lot about it and people are throwing a lot of rumors around and very little has happened. And even with the name still out there, it doesn't quite have the sex appeal of some of the other ones. Last year we saw David Price and Hamels and Tulowitzki and a lot of really big impact guys. I mean, if Andrew Kashner gets traded or even Jonathan Lucroy or Jay Bruce, those are probably the best of the group. And I don't know that they're even the guys that would be like, wow, they're going to tilt the balance of a pennant race. It just happens to be one of those kinds of years, especially with a lousy free agent crop coming up, that there just aren't that many guys being dangled around, and so, hopefully it's not a bunch of rumor mongering over nothing, and we do have some stuff happen. I think it'll happen over the weekend, but it might just be more along the lines of relievers and Steve Pearce types and, bats, but not any huge Chris Sale, Chris Archer kind of, blow your doors off kind of trade.
Right. As you tweeted out a couple days ago, Jerry, that an executive told you that teams won't get aggressive to the weekend, and now, of course, you got that extra day now. And it seems like, as you just mentioned, with the free agent class not that great, but it seems like teams are building their teams a lot differently. How has the trade deadline kind of changed over the last couple of years with teams? They don't want to spend that big money, and they don't want to go for the rentals. Everybody seems like they're building their organization through prospects and the draft. It seems like things have changed over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, a few teams have done it. Look at Cespedes went to the Mets last year as a rental, had a big impact. David Price went to Toronto, had an impact. So it does happen, but it has to be kind of a special circumstance where, a team like Cleveland, for instance, it's like, how often are they going to get here? They really have to do something, I would think. But ideally, if you can get a guy, you'd like to get somebody who's going to be with your team for another 2 or 3 years, like the Rangers did with Hamels. And the days of those rentals, they still happen, but you're going to get less for them just because teams don't want to give up a ton for a guy they're only going to have for a couple months. The Cubs got Chapman, but they could win a World Series for the first time in 108 years. So I think they figured that it was worth it to give up something pretty decent for a rental.
Yeah, and different teams are at different spots. You just mentioned the Cubs. They are starving. You got a team like the Marlins, who I guess maybe didn't know if they'd be in this spot. Particularly, typically a cheap team. If you're trying to deal with different teams, I guess it really depends on where they are. The Cubs, they're going for it now. How about the Marlins? Is that a team that maybe, if you just hold out long enough, that you could maybe win the deal against them?
Well, the Marlins are kind of going for it. I think they're getting some pressure from Jeffrey Loria. I think for whatever reason he feels like this is a big year to try to get to the postseason. He's trying to get a TV deal, but they don't have that much on the farm. So, if you're dealing with a team that doesn't have much in the way of prospects, you can only try to siphon so much out of them. How much can you? If they don't have prospects to deal, and that's what you want, that's what makes it very tough. And the Marlins have been looking for a pitcher here for the last month, and they haven't been able to pull the trade off. And I think part of it is the fact that they just don't have an attractive enough group of prospects to give up.
Jerry Crasnick's with us, ESPN.com senior baseball writer, is spending some time close to the deadline. It is a little bit one day, as we mentioned. It's on the Monday this year, August 1st. So teams, and remember, teams can still make those August deals. Later on, the non-waiver deals are the first, and then the waiver deadline right after that. But, one thing is, you look at a team like the Yankees, Jerry, which made the Chapman deal last week. But you never know what they're going to do. Is this finally a year where they are going to follow suit and start to be a seller and try to replenish their farm system? Do you think that the Yankees finally tapped out with thinking that they're a playoff team this year?
Well, not maybe 100%, but they did make the trade, obviously, for Chapman, and that was a sign that, a smart move, I think, to get a nice young shortstop, the Torres, and a couple of other pieces, and maybe Ivan Novo, who's a free agent. They might move him. They could move Andrew Miller. I don't think the Yankees are ever going to get into complete sell mode, but I think they are selectively selling off pieces and really kind of trying to walk that fine line.
All right. Also, Toronto gets upped in that deal, and they're going on the heels of the Orioles here. Is there a team in the American League side that has to make a deal? Is there somebody that you think, if they don't end up doing something, that will be the downfall for them?
Well, I think Cleveland's, probably the big team. I just think they need a big power bullpen arm. They need maybe a catcher or a bat. So I think they're a team that is in a position to make some noise, but if they can't do a significant trade, I think it would be a pretty big letdown for them.
Indians, by the way, 4.5 games up on the Tigers. The White Sox, you mentioned Sale. We know that. Now, do you think what happened over the weekend can help get him traded? I know you mentioned before that it's going to be tough to get him, but are they at least more open maybe than they were before?
I don't think it really is going to make a huge difference, to be honest with you. I just think he's such a big commodity that you don't want to trade him under pressure, and, they can get through this few days. It's not like they're at war with each other. They seem to have mended fences. And so I think he stays there. Now, do they trade him in the offseason or trade Quintana? That's more of an organizational thing. Do they really want to sort of rebuild and change, or do they want to stick with him? But I think it's a better decision to make in December when you can take a deep breath than in July when you're 5 days removed from the guy slicing up a bunch of uniforms.
A bizarre story there. Talking with Jerry Crasnick. Hey, Jerry, if you don't watch the first half of the baseball season and you're just kind of tuning in now and you say, all right, the Royals won the World Series last year. Here they are, 49-51, 8.5 back. Did they have a run in them, or is this just not the year for Kansas City?
Well, they haven't scored any runs. I mean, it just might not be their year, which is kind of disappointing. We're 100 games in, and I'm not sure I see it in them. They're about, I think maybe 6 or 7 games out in the wild card with a bunch of teams to climb over. So my guess is this probably just isn't their year. But, they're going to have That's why they're starting to entertain the thoughts of guys like Volquez or Hochevar, some of these guys who are on the verge of free agency. I think they're going to listen to, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him make a couple moves in the next 3 days.
Happens fast. 2 years in a row in the World Series. Last year's champions, now possibly dealing some of their players off. Let's look at the National League. We're talking with Jerry Crasnick here. How about the Mets? What's the feeling around baseball with them? They've kind of been an enigma team. That pitching is, kind of leaking oil a little bit here. 53-48, 6 back. What do you see for the Mets over the final 2 months?
Well, they get I don't think they're a team. Again, they're a club. I just don't know that it's their year, but they still have Syndergaard, and they still have DeGrom and Bartolo Colon and Steven Matz. I mean, they do have some pitching. They could get on a roll, but I think Washington's probably a better team. You look at the Cubs, and, I don't even know if the Mets are really a wild card team. The Marlins seem to have some momentum. So I think this might be a little bit of an off year for them. Maybe they're having a World Series hangover, and losing Matt Harvey didn't help. So, again, it's a club. I just don't know that the vibe is that positive, but they went on a run last year, so it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility.
In the NBA, when the playoffs start, you think there's about 4 teams maybe that could win the whole thing. How many teams do you think in this baseball landscape, with the 2 wild cards obviously, legitimately are World Series contenders?
Well, that's a good question. Probably depends on what teams get. Right now, I guess the Cubs are probably the best team in baseball. They're the most complete team in baseball. I think Washington could be a factor. They have to make some moves. The Giants could be, but they probably need to add a pitcher. In the American League, Cleveland certainly has good starting pitching. Boston's a little bit shaky on the pitching. Texas is kind of shaky on the pitching. Houston's a team to watch out for. So it's really kind of wide open. I think right now you look at the Cubs, and probably the better teams are in the National League, 3 or 4 of them. And in the American League, it's kind of pick one out of a hat. It's really, you could throw a blanket over a bunch of them.
Hey, Jerry, I want to circle back locally here with you real fast and look at Philadelphia, 46-57, minus 108. We know the offense struggles a lot. The pitching very young, and it's been pretty good. How are they much further along than you thought? Are they about where you thought they'd be? How would you kind of surmise them at the trade deadline for 2016?
They're probably a little bit ahead record-wise. I mean, I think, they're on a pace maybe to win in the low 70s. I think that's fine. They're going to get some money off the books. I think the big key is how are guys like J.P. Crawford and Jorge Alfaro and Nick Williams. These guys are going to come up and be impact players, because if they are, then they could be in good shape, because they do have some pretty good young pitching. It's really just a question of, those kids that are on the farm right now, and they have a lot of them, it seems like. If you get 5 or 6 of them to come up and get a core of position players, you might really be onto something, and then they will have some money free. But, if the farm system doesn't come through and some of these kids don't pan out the way they thought, then it's going to be disappointing. But I think right now they're in a pretty good position.
And in the Phillies news today, Aaron Altherr up with the big club. And I don't know, how much when he hurt his wrist in preseason and the spring training, Jerry, were they counting on, not counting on him, but were they really intrigued by him? Because I think people might have forgot about him. He came up last year, and to see him up now, what was kind of the feeling around the organization in spring training about him before the injury?
Well, good defensive player, big bat with some power and maybe some holes, but certainly an intriguing guy. So it's disappointing that he got hurt, but it's nice that he's back. We'll see. They'll have a couple more months to assess him. And, I don't know that you expect him to be one of your 2 or 3 best hitters, but, with the power he has, with the defense he has, he certainly could be a pretty, competent major league regular, and that's another one less spot you have to worry about.
Yeah, and interesting to see how they juggle the playing time in that outfield. Goodell, Ashe, we know Borges on the DL. A couple guys trying to fight for some playing time for the Phillies, who take on the Braves for a 4-game set. Jerry Crasnick, ESPN.com, senior baseball writer, tracking down a lot of the trades possible at the deadline. As Jerry mentioned, might not be a very busy time, but we'll see. Jerry, always appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mike.